Peter Davison was my childhood Doctor. His run made me into a lifelong fan of Doctor Who. But he's never been one of my favourites. I've always thought he was not as charismatic or eccentric as some of the other Doctors. Watching his run again has made me realise that's a bit unfair. Towards the end he started to give some excellent performances, but for most of it he was never really given the chance to shine. To wrap up my coverage of the 5th Doctor era, I'm now going to rank all 20 of his stories in order from worst to best, and I'll include links to my full reviews of each story as I go along. At 20, Time Flight. A hopelessly overambitious script combined with a low budget and terrible guest stars to make this one a real stinker. There's some good scenes at Heathrow Airport and on board Concorde, but once they travel to the poorly realised distant past and meet the badly disguised master, it all falls apart. At 19, Warriors of the Deep. The Sea Levels and Silurians return, looking much worse than they did the first time round. With them they bring the Merker, which is one of the most laughable monsters in all of Doctor Who, and they proceed to kill off a bunch of humans who it's impossible to care about. There should have been another story in place of this mess. At 18, The Visitation. Again, this suffers from really bad alien costumes. The 17th century setting does look pretty good, but the story itself is really dull and unmemorable, apart from the ending where they start the Great Fire of London, which is the only part that anyone remembers. At 17, The King's Demons, another underwhelming period drama. It's only 2 episodes long, so it doesn't outstay its welcome, but the master meddling in human history is very petty of him, and Chameleon is a terrible prop who should never have been used once, let alone twice. At 16, Terminus. A bit of a dull story. Lots of big sci-fi ideas, but they don't really come off as intended. Tegan and Turlo's subplot is completely pointless, but at least Lisa gets something to do in her final story. At 15, Fort of Doomsday. Another slow spaceship story. The companions are at their most annoying, and the Doctor is at his most ineffectual. And the bad guys never feel like a massive threat, but there's a strong guest cast, and it all moves along quite nicely. At 14, Arc of Infinity. The Amsterdam setting provides good value, with plenty of scenes of characters running around the picturesque city, but the story is a confusing mess, and there's yet another ridiculous alien. Still, Ulmer is a strong villain, and the constant jumping between Amsterdam and Gallifrey means it never gets boring. At 13, The Awakening. This one's not too bad. We're starting to get into the watchable stories now. It's another 2-parter. Perhaps it could have done with an extra part, as it never really gets going. But again, they make the most of the location filming, and the Malice is a memorably nightmarish villain. At 12, Planet of Fire. Again, lots of location filming, this time in Lanzarote, which makes it look better than just about any other story from this era. But the story is too crammed with entrances and exits for it to really work on its own. At 11, Frontios. Decent enough, but nothing special. It's just a solid base under siege story that feels like it comes from an earlier era of Doctor Who. Again, the monsters are not the best, but it's a strong story for Peter Davison's Doctor, who finally gets to play the character as an old man in a young man's body. At 10, Black Orchid. The best of the 2-parters. There's no real villain or any science fiction elements at all, but it's a very entertaining watch, as the TARDIS crew basically have a holiday in part 1, although the story does kick in part 2, and it makes a nice change of pace. At 9, Mordred Undead. Another story that crams in a lot of plot points, but this does actually feel like a coherent, well worked out story, with a great dual role for Nicholas Courtney and a strong introduction for Turlough. At 8, Castrovalva. A solid introduction to the new regular cast, with half the story set in the TARDIS, and the other half set in a wonderfully weird city that turns out to be a deadly trap. Peter Davison gets to show his range here, as the Doctor is much more vulnerable than he has been in years. At 7, Resurrection of the Daleks. A pacey action adventure, full of gunfights and death scenes, and a memorable exit for Tegan. It's a solid return for the Daleks, and a great first appearance from Toy Malloy's Davros. At 6, The Five Doctors. A great anniversary special full of memorable moments, and strong appearances from past Doctors and villains. Not a massive amount of plot, but fun for any fans. It's definitely flawed, but for many years this was the anniversary special to beat. At 5, Snake Dance. Now we're getting to the really good stuff. A great story with the writing, directing, set design and costumes all combining to make a well-realised alien planet. And Janet Fielding doing great work when possessed by the Mara. At 4, Enlightenment, the peak of the Black Guardian trilogy. Not so much for the Black Guardian himself, but for everyone else. The sailing ships in space provide a unique setting that works out very well, and there's an excellent guest cast portraying a memorable group of characters, with plenty for the regulars to do as well. At 3, Kinder, one of the best scripts in all of Doctor Who, packed with well-developed characters and themes, slightly let down by the studio-bound production and effects, but still a definite highlight of the era. At 2, Earthshock, another all-action story, going from an underground cave to a spaceship to prehistoric Earth, bringing back the Cybermen as a deadly force, and with an unforgettable ending with the death of Adric. And at number 1, The Caves of Androzani. I just reviewed this one last week, so there's not much more I can say about it. It's an outstanding story. The writing and directing are all much better than usual, and Peter Davison gives one of his best performances, alongside another fantastic guest cast, definitely the high point of his era. So that was the 5th Doctor era. It had its ups and downs, but overall I'd say it was pretty strong, with more hits than misses. I don't think I'll be saying that about the 6th Doctor, but that's for next year. Before then I will be reviewing Joy to the World, and possibly the War Games in colour. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see what I thought of those, and I'll see you next time.